So without further ado now, I'm going to move into our first session effectively, which has 4 speakers. And we are going to begin with Jeremy Martineau, who was in so many ways our first point of call at Fishguard. Through Jeremy, we got to meet so many different interesting people, and he remains a huge support to the project. And I thought it would be wonderful to have him kick off the day with a kind of conspectus, an overview of what Fishguard has to offer. He will be familiar to many of you, but those of you who don't know him will find him an incredibly useful resource. Okay, Jeremy, over to you. Are you sharing a screen?
Yes, please. You don't want to see me, you want to see something else.
Okay, I'm going to make you a co-host, Jeremy, and that should allow you to share your screen, so bear with me. Oh, you're allowed to do it already. That's great to know. Go for it.
Okay, thank you. So, visit Fishguard and Goodwick. I'm a recent arrival, only 40 years ago, so I'm still learning stuff. So I'm going to run through a few slides to give you my impressions of the area. Like all of these British islands, as they're called, Wales was born in fire, probably somewhere much nearer the South Pole, actually. And then it moved around the planet until it ended up where we are now. And the geology of this area is so complex. It really is an amazing area and offers a great research landscape for students of all kinds. When the ice sheet melted, it left the moraine, these amazing chunks of rock, and some of which were moved later to form part of Stonehenge. And then settlers came. That's obviously a more recent arrival because the soil here is good. This is a great area for growing almost anything. In fact, we can grow everything that's needed across the dietary range in Pembrokeshire. Here is a mark. I hope you can see it clearly. This is a strange arrow mark cut into some rocks very close to my home in the area called Garn Wen. Nobody quite knows what it's pointing to. There may have been more people living here in those ancient times of 3,000 or plus years ago than live here now. The area is studded with the remains of circles, of stone circles and other signs of early habitation. And of course, many burial sites. And this is a very small one at Penrue Farm. The farmer did tell me that he had to put the top back on with his low loader on one occasion. Fishing was good. I mean, this is one of the main features that kept people living here. And this sculpture by John Cleal is at the entrance to the port, and you can just see in it the fish there, because this was a great area. And one of the stories on the Ports Past and Present portfolio of stories is about the fish traps that are still visible in Fishguard Bay. And of course, our many restaurants and cafes love to be able to get hold of the modern seafood, which is not so much fish as crab and lobster and other seafoods of that kind. So it's a great place to eat. Then visitors came and the culture changed. And here is one of the signs of the early Christianity, because the Ancient Connections project that Angarad is from knows this place well. This is a little church at Llanunda, and I must make sure it's added onto your map, Avi, later on. A very ancient, lovely little place. In fact, I'll be taking the service there in a couple of weeks' time because I'm one of the local priests as well. And it's here that the last invasion soldiers camped around this place and used pages from the Bible inside to light their fires. So this was a great place for ships and shipbuilding. And of course, many ships ended up as wrecks. Here is just one extract from a book on the shipwrecks of Wales. And you can see how many ships didn't make it safely into harbour. Those are some of the wrecks from way back. So many people died. And here is, of course, some perhaps less welcome visitors that came in 1797. You'll hear all about that from one of the speakers later on, the famous last invasion. But there's more to Fishguard than the last invasion. here are some of our welcomers, because we do welcome visitors, and in a normal year we'd have probably 17 to 20,000 visitors coming from cruise ships, and there's one of the regular cruise ships behind, and so we have a great team called Fishguard Friendly Faces. And we have many choirs as well, and here they are singing a welcome to some of the cruise visitors, so they'll come out and sing whatever the weather. Of course, the sea was the main way to reach Fishguard until railways, and it was the railway that that put Fishguard much more onto a UK map, and because it was one of the ports, it was the port chosen to be the place to connect mails from New York into London. And there was a time when the train got to London from here much quicker than it does now. So we haven't moved forward, we've moved back a bit. And then this gentleman, Dennis Corbett Wilson, who actually is an Irishman, but he was keen to try the early plane, the Blériot, to fly from Britain to Ireland. And he was the first man to achieve that flight, taking off from a field just above here in Goodwick, where I live. And he made it in 100 minutes near Enniscorthy, didn't quite get his landing right, and ended up stuck into a hedge with a broken propeller. But he was the first to make that flight in 1912. The view from my house, it's just beautiful, looking east over into the Preselles. And it's this wonderful sense of space and well-being, which is one of our main themes that we're working on to develop our tourism. This is an area rich in the creative arts, and here is an artist at work. There are more artists per head of population in North Pembrokeshire than any other part of the United Kingdom. So Martin, time to move here. And of course, the other creative art we're famous for is music. And here's the Goodwick Brass Band, which is a prize-winning band in the United Kingdom. And they have 3 levels of choir, from starters to concert performers. And many other musical events happen here too. And the welcome extends to the many visitors. Here is one of our home hosts welcoming a group from one of the cruise ships. These are, I think, a group of Americans, and they love coming here and meeting people. At the center of town is our theatre and a concert hall, and that is subject. It's going to have a mural put on this yellow wall on the side in the near future, courtesy of the Ancient Connections project. Major centre for our community. And Sea Trust is an ocean studying charity, educational charity in Goodwick, and this is one of their rooms, which, as you can see, it's full of interesting content. So we are now North Pembrokeshire Trade and Tourism, and we've just submitted a bid, nearly £500,000 worth of bid, to the UK government's new fund, the Community Renewal Fund, and that will support, if we're successful, some 35 different projects ranging from St David's down to St Dogmael's, with many benefiting in Fishguard and Goodwick itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. So as you see, from the very earliest time when the world began to cool right up to the present day in 7.5 minutes, that's pretty impressive. Thank you so much. I think what we're going to do is we're going to hear from all of our speakers, and then we'll have a conversation at the end, because there should be about 15 to 20 minutes to have a chat then. If something Jeremy's just said has inspired you to a question, please drop it in the chat. Liz will be collecting them up and we can talk together then. We move on then to our next speaker, who is Dr. Richard Unsworth from Swansea University. And I'm really pleased to have Richard here because we came across his project on seagrass. I've been looking a little bit online at it, and it sounds absolutely fascinating. And I wanted this panel to think a little bit about the coast, about marine life, and about how Fishguard and the coast interact with the sea. And this seems to me to be an excellent example of how people and the sea are working together. So Richard, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Val. Bodhidar. It's nice to have this opportunity to speak today. It's also a very different audience of people that I'm talking to that I wouldn't usually be connected to. So it's a nice opportunity, and I'm going to be taking a sort of a delve into the ocean really with my talk today. So can I? Oh, I've got sharing screen rights. Yeah. Okay. Let's. Can you see my slides?
Yep, we can see you there.
Okay, so I'm an academic scientist at Swansea University. I'm also a director of a marine conservation charity called Project Seagrass, and we essentially work to understand and conserve marine biodiversity in our coastal seas, and a key component of that, seagrass meadows. So that's what I'm explaining to you today, really. And these seagrasses are something that most people on our planet, unfortunately, don't really know much about. They're plants that are actually adapted to live in the ocean. So all those fundamental things you know about plants in the in terrestrial environments are true in a marine sense. So they have flowers, they have pollen that pollinates those flowers, and they produce seeds. Those seeds live in the marine soil. They germinate and they go into new plants. And basically they adapted from a terrestrial life to come back into the ocean, really, and adapted to live in that saline environment. In the same way that you get aquatic plants in rivers and lakes, this particular group of plants have adapted to live in salty water as well. And in the UK, we're lucky to have two key species of this, Zostra marina, Zostra nolti, that have a really important role in our coastal environment. So here's some pictures that I guess in a short video, they're all taken around the Welsh coast that show you the the value of these meadows. So they're very rich in animal life. If we compare a seagrass meadow against a sandy or muddy environment, we have 30 to 40 times the amount of animal life present in that seagrass meadow. In a particular bay on the Flynn Peninsula up north that we spent a lot of time studying, we've now found about 60 species of fish living in that seagrass, and it's very high abundance relative to surrounding environments. And this seagrass in Wales is part of the coastal urban environment as well as the more remote locations. So Milford Haven Waterway, one of the UK's biggest ports, is full of seagrass. There's, if any of you know that area, Milford Haven, Gellerswick, there's some very big LNG terminals at that site, and mixed among that kind of environment is a lot of seagrass. Look at other ports around the coast of the UK. Look at Wales. We think about maybe Holyhead Port, a lot of seagrass around there. So it's a habitat that very much interacts with the sort of human coastal usage in Wales and throughout the Irish Sea. Really, there's other ports in Ireland that have a lot of seagrass associated to them. People are waking up to the importance of seagrass, unfortunately not because of its value in biodiversity, but in terms of its value in storing large amounts of carbon in its sediments. And healthy seagrass meadows are able to sequester, to lock that carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in the seabed for millennia. And they do that at a very, very rapid rate. So a great source of trying to think about nature-based solutions to climate change. Conserving, protecting, improving and restoring seagrass is a great part of that discussion. And that's what we're doing in Swansea University and Project Seagrass. We're trying to work towards those goals. And that's necessary, not just because of a climate perspective, but because we've lost these meadows around the UK. There's a lot of speculation around the Welsh coast as to where we've lost seagrass, possibly because that was lost a long time ago as part of the Industrial Revolution, various stages of that Industrial Revolution. We don't have the great data. In other parts of the UK where we do have good data, it really shows that the loss has been vast. On the Humber, we lost hundreds and hundreds of hectares of what we know anyway, from the 1930s to 2018. There's now only a few square meters in the Humber that used to be hugely extensive. The same story exists in places where they're well documented in the 1970s. Stour and the Orwell on the Essex-Suffolk borders, vast seagrass loss. We recently dug out an old discussion in a newspaper in North Wales that discussed how there was so much seagrass around the Anglesey coast that they were considering in the 1800s of using seagrass as an alternative to cotton. But we know along that coast that's described that there's no seagrass there now. We just don't have a good understanding of how much loss has happened. And unfortunately, most of that loss is due to coastal development, mining, poor water quality, all sorts of different interacting factors. There's no one individual, a single industry or problem that's caused that loss. It's a cumulative problem. But I guess what we're seeing is part of that solution. It's not the only solution, but it's part of that solution. It is to think about planting seagrass, so and restoring it to areas where either we thought it used to exist, or in areas where we now know the environment is suitable for seagrass. And that's working on using global understanding of seagrass restoration that's developed over the last 30 years. And also work that we've been doing at Swansea and in Project Seagrass to test ways that we can apply that understanding from other parts of the world to the Welsh coast and broader other parts of the UK. So, and there's different ways of doing this. You can take an approach of very similar to going to your mum's garden and pinching a plant out of that garden. You can kind of go and do that and transplant seagrass. But you can also take seeds, collect them, separate them out, and plant them in little pots. Our pots, in this sense, are little Hessian bags, and we plant them in the seabed. And that's what we've been doing at our pilot project over in Dale in Milford Haven Waterway. And over the last 12, 18 months, we've planted over 1 million seagrass seeds. And the biggest project of its kind ever conducted in the UK. And hopefully the start of a journey to restoring our habitats in our coastal UK seas. And that's a pilot project, and we're trying to understand both the biology of that scenario, but also the social community interactions that enable a project like that to happen. And what we're beginning to see is that we're getting tens of thousands of mature seagrass plants growing on the seabed in places that haven't seen seagrass for possibly 100 years. And they're maturing and they're beginning to expand. So over the next couple of years, we hope to see up to 2 hectares of seagrass growing, and then maybe over the longer term that might actually expand. But the key part of our project, and something that has been a theme throughout my research as a scientist and our conservation work in the UK and globally, is about bringing communities with us on that journey to restore the ocean, so that conservation and biodiversity isn't some sort of separate entity to people's livelihoods, people's well-being. So people can benefit from that activity, and it's from that perspective that we work very closely with people in Dale, and we had some very good responses. We had some opposition to what we were trying to do, but we worked very closely with stakeholders to find ways around their concerns and to find solutions that meant that people could benefit from the activity that we're conducting. So that's about giving certification to responsible fishers. It's about trying to we brought in some funding to provide some visitor moorings to help protect the seagrass, but also to provide some income to some community groups. So our work was about working with people, not against people, and a history of marine conservation in Wales particularly has been this sort of sense that they're separate entities and that they can't coexist, and we've been trying to sort of fight that battle to show how conservation can work with people in heavily utilized locations such as Milford Haven. And that's just the start of this journey. We've got bigger ambitions to extend our work. We're proposing now some projects in North Wales coast and in the Solent in southern England, and trying to currently examine how, where, why we can actually do that work. And it's part of a bigger mission to effectively go from restoring seagrass in a kind of allotment gardening type approach to something that's more akin to agriculture. So we can actually plant vast amounts of seagrass that can stimulate fisheries production, that they can help protect our coastlines, that they can help store huge amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere, and they can at the same time filter some of the nasty bugs that are in the water column, and be a general benefit to coastal communities and their well-being. And what's on my plate now for the next sort of 12 months is trying to understand these locations around the coasts of North Wales and the Solent to work out where are the places that we can restore them, where do we need to make those choices so that the biological conditions are right, and the communities that are associated and linked to those potential sites can benefit from our activity. And yeah, that's essentially a sort of brief overview of the work that we're doing, but it's something that we see as being an activity that we'd like to see growing around ports. We'd like to see it kind of linking to people and their links to the coast. So marine conservation isn't just some sort of activity that exists away from people, but it's something that's part that seagrass has become a social ecological system with people at the heart of that. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Diolch yn fawr, Richard. That was absolutely fascinating, and as somebody said, an uplifting story, and a story about us not inflicting damage on the beautiful sea, but actually working with the sea to help us all. And oh, it's just fantastic, really good. So yeah, we'd love to hear more about that and to continue this conversation with you at a later date. And in fact, the whole notion of marine conservation being something that should be in and for communities is at the absolute heart of what Sea Trust do in Fishguard. And it's a real pleasure now to introduce you to Holly. Are you there, Holly?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
Who is here from Sea Trust Wales to tell you a little bit about their work. Hi, so over to you now, Holly.
Thanks, Mariana. Just share my screen. Face out in the room. Brill, thanks for that introduction. It actually moves on quite nicely from what Richard was saying there, because we are Sea Trust Wales and we are a marine wildlife conservation charity. And yeah, I'll tell you a little bit more about us. Firstly, I'm Holly. I'm one of the project officers and researchers for Sea Trust. There's a small team of us staff, and we've got a lot of volunteers on the ground as well. So I'll talk to you more about that now. So a lot along the lines of Project Seagrass, really. Our main reason for existing is to get local people taking care of their wildlife. It's amazingly surprising to me how many local people don't know what they've got just on their doorstep, and how you can really not only use that to attract more people to the area, but use it to then take care of it, which of course keeps the area nice and healthy and keeps it nice for future generations as well. So we're here, we're on the port. We like to think we're very much associated with the port because it is pretty much our home. We're based at the Ocean Lab, and we just look out directly onto Fishguard Harbour. And so we're looking at the ferry going out every day, which is quite a big thing for some of our visitors as well. They love to watch the ferry going out. So we're there. We're normally the first port of call if something happens within the port itself as well, especially in terms of marine wildlife. So yeah, it's very, very important to us, and everything we then do stems from the port itself. So that's who we are. One way we like to get the local people involved, as well as the tourists, is our aquarium that Jeremy mentioned earlier. We're a catch and release aquarium, so everything that we have in there, bar a couple of species, are species from the harbour, in and around the harbour and in and around Fishguard Bay. We actually collect these ourselves, or we have a few friendly fishermen that don't mind handing over some of the things they catch to us, and they stay with us for a few months or so, depending on the species. And we can actually show everybody what is underneath the waves just outside some people's windows, if they're lucky enough to live that close to the sea. We take the education side quite seriously as well. We always get lots of visits from schools and colleges. We work very closely with the local schools and Pembrokeshire College, and we go along with school syllabus, but we also have our own agendas as well, lots of stuff about plastic and climate change, and then again about the species we actually have here, just trying to get people learning about what we have, and so they can have pride in what we have here, and then they want to actually take action to take care of it and protect it for themselves. And in pre-COVID times, we did host and also team up with a lot of local organisations to run numerous events. These can be sometimes from big community events down at the Parog, or even our marine mammal surveys up at Strumble Head or other sites. Again, we're just trying to raise awareness for what we've got there. We also take our work elsewhere sometimes, go and do talks and presentations for other either community groups, or on the scientific side, we like to go to scientific conferences as well. We do also run a training course most years, bar last year, and everybody here that takes on this course ends up with an accredited qualification from Pembrokeshire College as well. So that's something we definitely getting back to this year, even if we have to go virtual. One of the other ways we like to get involved with the local community, and some of you may have seen already, is our Ocean Guardians project. This is basically us going into businesses, organisations and schools and asking them to sign a pledge to try and reduce the amount of plastic they're using in their organisation, especially single-use plastics. We're really lucky in Fishguard and Goodwick. A lot of the businesses are very eco-conscious already, and those that aren't quite there yet are always really happy to hear our advice and what they can do to make the changes. So we have already given out lots of gold awards around Fishguard and Goodwick, and hoping to spread that a bit further as well. Then we have our research side of things. So we do have a team of scientists, and our main focus of research at the moment is marine mammals. The reason we study marine mammals is because they are top predators in the area, which means they can be really great indicators to the health of the ocean, what's going on under the waves. Because marine mammals do have to come up to the surface to breathe, they can be a little bit easier to study compared to some fish species, for example. So we go out pretty regularly. We have our small boat surveys that take us out to the Celtic Deep. And here we see everything from dolphins, the minke whales, fin whales, the turtles, the tuna, almost everything that you can imagine, crazy trips. And then we also do our ferry trips as well. So we are on the ferries from Fishguard to Rosslare, normally every month, pre-COVID times. That's becoming a bit of a theme here. We are hoping to get back to our ferry surveys as soon as possible. We haven't actually been out on a boat for the last year because of all the restrictions, which is quite tough. But luckily, we've been able to get out and do our land-based marine mammal surveys. And the majority of our land-based surveys are part of my project, which is the Porpoise Photo ID project. We're one of the first organisations in the world to have run a porpoise photo ID project, because a lot of people will tell you you can't photo ID porpoises, they're too small and they don't jump around like dolphins do. However, we are the first in the UK to have a dedicated project to porpoises and their photo ID. And we've managed to identify 145 porpoises so far, and 30% of those are actually resident to the area. So we go out with local volunteers, take as many photos of the porpoises as we can, try and recognise them as individuals, and we're learning so much more about the species because we're looking at them on an individual basis rather than just looking at the whole population as a whole. And the second project we've got going on at the moment is our Take the Bait project. So this is a project working with Macduff Shellfish and Bangor University. We're also working really closely with some of the fishermen in Pembrokeshire, and we're just trying to work out some innovative products and systems to reduce ocean plastic originating from bait bags that are usually used in the shellfish industry, because unfortunately you do see them floating around and animals getting caught up in them. So we're looking for solutions for everyone, not just the animals, but the fishermen as well. We want to stop the bags going in the water in the first place, and we're also looking at investigating the development of biodegradable materials, just in case those bags do then go into the water. So that's our two main current projects, but we do take on projects throughout the year with lots of different organisations. We've done some stuff with Swansea University before, and then we also do a lot of community-based stuff as well. But that's pretty much it. That's a whistle-stop tour of Sea Trust as it is at the moment. As you can see, we're very close to the port. We're there all the time. We study on it. We bring a lot of people to the area, come rain or shine. We then educate those tourists and the locals. We're trying to work with local businesses because we're all for boosting the local economy. And essentially, we're just trying to learn more and more about the wildlife we've got here. So again, we can save it for future generations and ensure the health of our oceans. I just had to put this in there just because yesterday we put up this advert for volunteers. So if I've got your marine wildlife taste buds tingling, that's not really taste buds, then we are looking for volunteers for this season. So do get in touch. You can check us out on our website or our social media. We are really happy to say that we can reopen the aquarium again next week. So if you are down in the area and you see the Ocean Lab, please do come and say hi. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Holly. Another wonderful set of stories there. I was always particularly pleased that the People's Porpoise Project shared its initials with ports past and present, and I think there's some very good link up could go on there. I'm delighted to hear you're opening again. That's excellent news, because the little cafe at the top of the Sea Trust building is just one of the most wonderful places to have a cup of coffee. You look out across Fishguard Bay, and I sat there having a cup of coffee, probably waiting for Jeremy. Oh, he would have been there already, actually. He's always early. But watching a seal play just below me on the beach, it was just extraordinary. I love the idea too that you're looking at them as individuals and trying to get to know these animals out there in the sea. Brilliant. Well, lots to discuss later on, but we do have a final speaker in this session who is somebody who really knows the sea very closely. Andrew Doherty is a guest from Ireland, Waterford based. He's a writer, a community development worker, but he's also worked as a fisherman, and his blogs about boats and the sea and about the whole kind of marine environment are really, really fascinating things. So we're really pleased to have Andrew here today with us. And if you'd like to jump in there, Andrew, I don't know if you have a PowerPoint as well.
Yes, I do, and I'm going to try share it, which is something I've never done before. So we'll give it a lash.
Excellent.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so can you hear and see that?
We can. That's perfect, Andrew. Well done.
All right. So good morning from Cheek Point in County Waterford. My name is Andrew Doherty, and what I wanted to talk about this morning was my community here in Waterford on the southeast coast of Ireland, and why I believe the heritage we are immersed in is so important to my area's future. My talk is titled A Fishing Village Without Fish, Reflections on a Living Heritage. So I'm coming to you today from what was once a fishing village, but is frankly now a dormitory community for the nearby Waterford city. My village lies at the start of the estuary that creates Waterford Harbour, and just with a 1,000 ships. I also live where the three rivers that feed the estuary meet. And that will just give you a visual of the area, maybe hopefully a bit better. So these are the rivers Barrow, Nore and Suir, collectively known as the Three Sisters, reminding us of the feminine attributed to such important elements by our Celtic forebears. It was this harbour and these rivers that saw the area thrive economically, and also what brought me to fish commercially. In the last number of years, I've set myself the task of telling some of the stories of these waters to attempt to capture before lost an era when the water sustained the community that I live in. I was born in Waterford in 1965, and my parents having returned from England with the promise of new economic opportunities. They had both emigrated in the Black 50s, when it was said that even the salmon, which were the backbone of the local fishery, deserted us. My dad had left for Liverpool, where he went to sea, and he's seen here now on the right. And my mum went to London, where initially she scrubbed floors in London's East End before finally getting a job in a factory. My mum had travelled via the ship the Great Western from Waterford. The ship had a long association on the cross-channel route, initially to Milford Haven, and after 1906 to the newly built Fishguard ferry terminal. The journey out had become a well-worn practice in my home village. As the ship travelled down river past Cheek Point, the villagers would emerge out of their homes, many of them taking to the quayside or their boats, and they would wave and shout out to the departing emigrants. Sometimes fires were lit on the shore, and on one infamous occasion, emigrants on deck complimented the display of a burning bush, without realising as the ship departed further out the harbour that half the village almost went afire in the resulting conflagration. The ship was renowned for rolling, however, and seasickness was common. And the fact that cattle were the staple outbound cargo on the ship and were given preferential treatment on their arrival at Fishguard certainly didn't help. In 1959, the Great Western ceased ferrying passengers, and when my mother travelled home for a visit, it was via the Rosslare route with a train connection to Waterford on the South West Wexford line. That line was the last major piece of rail infrastructure built in Ireland, which opened in 1906, and it allowed for rail passengers to access the boat ferry at Rosslare from the entire southeast of Ireland, or the south coast of Ireland. Just as an aside here, her last trip was in 1963 in the winter, after the Christmas holidays. And whichever ferry they were taking had to be warped out of Rosslare. The weather was so bad. There had been terrible snowstorms and the wind was northwesterly. And when they finally made Fishguard, the train was delayed. And when it finally did take off, there was no heating. The train kept getting buried in snowbanks on the railway line. And it took her nearly 20 hours to get to London with no heat, no sleep. And she'd never been as seasick in her life. It was the most desperate trip she ever took. And she swore she was finished with emigration and she was returning home the next chance she got. So growing up in a village, as I said, I was born in '65, in that era, was a strange and it was a somewhat surreal experience, really. Everyone looked out for one another, but it also meant that you couldn't easily step out of line. My parents would hear of any indiscretion within hours of it happening. But it was also a nourishing environment. I spent hours sitting with the older fishermen and the seafarers, drinking in their yarns and dreaming of following their paths. The fishing then was a seasonal affair. The winter time was spent chasing herrings in the motorboats, drift netting at the mouth of the harbour. In summer it was eel, fished with baited pots and sold to the continent. The bait was harvested from the rivers in fishing weirs that dated to at least the Norman conquest of 1170. But it was the salmon that was treasured most of all, the spring salmon and the smaller summer pail. Using a drift net in a small open punt, we fished morning and night from Monday to Friday and all the tides that we could. My first memory of fishing salmon was when I was about 5. Two neighbours, Tom Sullivan and his younger cousin Noel, brought me out one sunny but wild afternoon. As we drifted on the ebb tide down towards Passage East, I remember the waves crashing over the side and the fear in the pit of my stomach. My grandmother hunted Tom Sullivan for weeks after to give him a piece of her mind, furious at the danger she perceived. But my fear was momentary, and the thrill and the excitement of it, though, never left. I was probably 12 when I had my first salmon season as a fisher boy, working the summer holidays and properly learning the ropes. And when I completed my schooling, the only thought I had was to get my own boat and to start to fish. I can't say that the years that followed were financially very successful, but I can say they were some of the most challenging, exhilarating, and satisfying. To say I loved it would be an overstatement, but I loved many parts. The camaraderie, the unpredictability, the immersion in nature. Think, for example, of sitting in a boat on a river on a flat, calm day, the drift net slowing, the off-buoy marking the outside end hanging back, the float starting to slacken, all the signs of the changing tide. And then with the change in flow, the surface of the river alters as a light, almost imperceptible, draft of wind comes. And soon the nets are moving back upriver. The wind is picking up, and the clouds that were hanging away on the horizon are steadily coming your way. I'm never as close to nature and its minute changes as when I am on the river. But salmon were scarce, funds were low, and family responsibilities meant hard decisions. When the Irish government finally closed the salmon fishery in 2006, I was in college and working part-time, dreaming of some ways I could return to fish and make it pay. The closure coming as it did in the era of the Celtic tiger, as the boom in Ireland was called, was felt less severely in economic terms, but not so emotionally or physically. For the fishery was an expression of the community spirit. It gave an outlet for it, a purpose for being, a personal challenge, and a sense of satisfaction in being able to do what could never be learned from a book. Like many in my community, I greeted the closure with a mixture of disbelief and outright anger. I guess I went through all the stages of grief, and at some point decided that to at least write something of our experience down would be something in the absence of anything tangible that I could see being done. If I was honest, I'd have hoped others with more ability would have set to the task, and deep down, I suppose I still hope that that might one day be the case. But in starting to write, I found a new outlet for the pride and respect I held in my community. I began blogging in 2012, but it was only after I started to write about the heritage of the area that I began to feel confident in what I was saying. Those first few stories scared me witless. I waited the torrent of ridicule and abuse I felt was justified with such an amateurish style. I'm still awaiting the abuse, but over time the fear has lessened, although I still feel like I'm out on a very precarious limb. But writing will not preserve a culture I see is running away as river water would run through my open hands. For the fishing way of life is a physical expression. It's only real and meaningful when put into practice. I can write down the placement, I can describe the drifts, I can explain the laws that governed our practices and try to give expression to what it meant to be part of a traditional community. But those to me are only words. You see, I know in my heart how valuable the culture is and was. Although I pass it along to visitors, students and readers around the world, ultimately, what is a fishing village without a fishery? But then what is a fishery without fish, without a steady income to raise a family or to provide a home? Communities such as ours here in Waterford Harbour are the lesser for not having the coming and goings of boats and crew, the activity on the river, the gathering on the riverbank that made the villages what they are. Ultimately, I do see a future, but not without supports from society. I hope that in raising awareness of our unique culture, that I might help contribute to making this a reality in the future. Thanks.
Andrew, that was lovely. That was very moving and just beautifully expressed. I think your fears of amateur writing are entirely unnecessary. It's a really, really beautiful way of describing and capturing a way of life. And you're right, writing can't do everything, but it can be a way in for those of us who were not brought up with the gestures, with the movements, with the sounds and the smells that you evoke so beautifully there. And I think particularly with fishing communities, my family heritage is Cornish and from the Scilly Isles, you realise how much the actions of the day shape not just an entire working life, but everybody's lives around them. And the tide, as you rightly say, is the thing that marks the movement of the day in and out and shapes everybody's movements around it. And when I come home and I'm not next to the sea from Scilly, I miss that connection with the tide. And I think that's something that you captured beautifully there. So thank you very, very much to all four speakers this morning. It's been a very kind of diverse board. We have, amazingly, a good full seven or so minutes for some questions or comments or thoughts. And who would like to go first? I think Liz is going to. Liz, are there any in the chat that we'd like to pick out, or would anybody like to raise a hand and join in now and say something?
So some of our questions have already been answered in the chat. Could I ask a quick question?
You may.
I just wondered, and this is a question for Richard, I guess, and for the Sea Trust work as well. I wondered how much scope is there for people to get involved directly with this? You know, can people go out and plant seagrass for themselves, or is this something that's more specialist work and that needs, you know, special training and equipment and stuff? Or are there actually things that people can do with just a little bit of training and kind of get stuck in and you know, do some of this work?
No, that's a very interesting question. And Project Seagrass, we're actually working with a community group called Sea Wilding in Loch Craignish in Scotland. And there, we're not doing the work, we're just advising them. And they've actually been using that model for some time to look at oyster restoration. And they've been able to obtain some funding to help, you know, some of their to provide some of the logistical support and things like this from, you know, they need equipment and things like that. But they're doing it themselves. And we're hoping this summer, Sea Wilding are going to start that journey with seagrass restoration at a community level. And we're hopeful that it can work. So it does need some specialist direction, but you know, where there are organisations who want to take that sort of vision, I think the opportunity is there. But it's not just as simple as, yeah, let's go and plant some seagrass. So there is some you know, knowledge required, and there's permitting and things like this that have to be done. But it's certainly an opportunity where there are communities that are sufficiently engaged to get involved with and things like that.
So effectively, talking to people like groups today and getting out maybe to schools as well would be a way of creating that community sort of waterfall effect, where you get groups teaching other groups, and the scientists lead that. And that does sound
for sure.
Something. So much of what we hear about climate change just leaves you feeling helpless. And I think what's great about this story is that you feel you might be able to do something if you joined a group or volunteered, and the same with what Holly's doing there as well.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with you.
Liz, are there any more questions from the chat, or does anybody else want to jump in here and say something?
We have a question from Jane, so I don't know whether Jane would like to ask her question or whether I'll read it out. I think it's a question to all of the speakers, the whole panel, and also to the team generally as well. And it says, Jane thoroughly enjoyed this session. What would help you most in telling the story of what you're hoping to achieve across our networks? What would you like to see happening following this? I'm particularly taken with the sea wilding and also the geomorphology and the storytelling, creative writing aspect. So I think that's a very open question for our project, and also for any of the speakers as well. Where's this going next, I suppose?
Jeremy, would you like to jump in here?
Thank you. There are a number of ways in which publicity can be given to help with the aim of, one of the background aims of the project is to increase tourism, increase visitor numbers, particularly in shoulder months, isn't it? And I think that the whole process of telling the story is a way of attracting people, because a lot of the kind of demographic that loves North Pembrokeshire would love these stories. It really resonates with them and they can connect with it. And we could certainly put links onto our existing Visit Fishguard website. I think that would be a good way of doing that. And we have a social media team as well who could help with that.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'll jump in here and mention that one of the project strands is developing an app for phones, which is a connecting place. It's a place that brings information about businesses, heritage spots, history, what's going on together. And so, for example, if you stood down at the Sea Trust building at Fishguard Harbour, you might then be able to click on a link perhaps that took you into particularly maritime conservation activities. That might be one way that we could organise that material. And the other thing about the app I wanted to mention is that it's very much something that we want to live on after the life of the project, that you, the communities, should be developing and contributing to it if we can set up a framework to do so. So just to flag that up there as perhaps one of the things that Jeremy was mentioning. Any other particular responses to what you've heard this morning? Is that Edward, yeah?
Yes, good morning. Sorry, I haven't been able to join until now, but I just wanted to say we're making a lot of progress with our website for St Nicholas, Llanunda and Granson parishes. And much of probably the information you want will be on there, hopefully, by the end of June or early July. That will cover the whole area and a lot of different subjects which will be attached to the website. So we'll certainly hope to have that up and running fairly soon. What I can do is send you a schedule showing the subjects we've tackled so far, and there will be photographs and other details to go in on top of that as well. But I'm not actually building the website, I'm just collecting information and feeding it through to Planet in Narberth, who are building the website for us.
Gwych, diolch yn fawr iawn. That's really interesting to know. The great thing about the internet is that website can speak unto website, and so we can connect through from ours to yours, Edward, and that'll be just another new mine of information. Fantastic. Diolch. Any other thoughts or ideas coming out of this morning? Everybody seems to think that Andrew should now go on to bigger things. I think he already has, to be honest, but bigger than PPP. So yeah, congratulations again on that. Any other thoughts and ideas? In that case, I think what we'll do is we'll let everybody go and grab a cup of coffee. You probably need one by now.